Welcome to the complete story series here at Comicstorian, your #1 place for dramatic readings of your favorite comic books. Now you may have noticed, I'm not Benny. I am Dan, and I am here to bring you the story of Moon Knight. This is the MacKay run that is currently ongoing and takes place after the Moon Knight beats the Avengers over in the Avengers book. But anyway, if you have not been reading this one, you definitely should be. All alterations to the panels, text, and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by the respective companies. The shadows deepen in the room as Mr. Knight leans back in his chair, the statue of Khonshu watching over the room. "Welcome to the Midnight Mission. My name is Mr. Knight. How can I help?" he asks quietly. Terry looks at him nervously and tells his story. Elsewhere in the city, the vampires lean back in the front seat of the van, telling the new vampires in the back their plan. "Okay, baby vampires, here we go," one shouts, explaining that they need to kidnap and turn others so that they won't be the low vampires on the pyramid scheme. But something swoops down in front of them, angling towards the windshield, and Moon Knight shatters through the glass. "Nice night," he says as the vampires scream. The van loses control, flipping onto its side and sliding along the pavement. One of the vampires pulls himself free and starts to run. "I warned you. I warned all of you," Moon Knight calls from the darkness. Something cracks the vampire in the back of the head, dropping him to the ground. He looks up in shock at his friend's skull. "I paint my symbol on the walls for 2 reasons. The first is so people know that they're safe. My people, the people traveling at night. The second, a warning," he growls. The vampire rolls over, staring up in fear at Moon Knight, a stake in his hand. "This is my territory. This is my congregation. This is my mission. I'm the Moon Knight," he says. The new vampires have pulled themselves clear, but before they can run, 2 skulls clatter to the ground. "You killed them? Oh, thank you!" Reese gasps in relief, but she looks up to see Moon Knight stalking towards her. She throws her hands up, pleading with him not to kill them, explaining that she and the others were kidnapped, turned against their will. "We're not killers. We didn't ask for this. I was a vegan before," she says. Moon Knight stares at them for a moment before dropping his stake to the ground. Later, Dr. Sturman is surprised by this turn of events, but Mr. Knight explains that it is his duty to protect those who travel at night, that the new vampires were innocent. Their new lease on life had been thrust upon them. "They needed my protection," he explains. She nods, writing on her notepad, questioning Mark about his midnight mission. But he explains how it is his duty as a priest of Khonshu, even if he is at odds with his god after trying to take over the world and fighting the Avengers. Later, Mr. Knight leans back in his chair. "Welcome to the Midnight Mission. My name is Mr. Knight. How can I help?" he asks the old woman. She tells him about the creatures in her building, the ones who scratch at the door and take her neighbors in the night. The beasts snarl as Moon Knight twists, punching them and knocking them aside. Someone opens their door to the commotion, but Moon Knight whirls on them. "Close the door and lock it," he shouts. He kicks another of the vermin as he grabs one by the neck and throws him through the window, sending it screaming to the pavement below. He whirls on the others. "I know who you are. Vermin. One of Spider-Man's foes," he snaps, bringing the creatures up short. He says that he understands that the monster doesn't want to be alone, that he seems to have cloned himself, and now they need to feed. "But these are my people you're trying to eat. You tried to take one of mine, and I took one of yours. You can leave it at that. Scurry off and keep clear of my territory. Or you can test me further. I'm not Spider-Man, I'm Moon Knight, and I don't die," he growls at them. Later, Moon Knight swoops through the city, a new mission of checking on an attack in the neighborhood clinic. His new vampire assistant, Reese, on the other side of his cowl mic. "They said a supervillain was attacking it?" he asks as he drops out of the sky. smiling to see an 8-ball being punched by a civilian. The doctor looks up as Moon Knight approaches. "No, please, don't stop on my account," Moon Knight tells him with a wave of his hand. The doctor introduces himself as Dr. Bader and explains that he stopped 8-ball from breaking in and stealing drugs. "I had wondered when I'd meet you," Bader says as he wipes off the sweat. "That's the sort of thing people say right before they take a swing at me," Moon Knight notes as he hands the doctor some handcuffs. "Do we have beef I don't know about?" he asks. Bader shakes his head. "You're a fist of Khonshu, Mr. Spectre. You have a sacred duty," Bader says. Bader handcuffs the villain, explaining that he is surprised that Mark would allow vampires to live in his territory, that he considers it blasphemous. "What are you, moon wizard? Werewolf? You don't look like a mummy. Whichever of Khonshu's cronies you are, don't forget who you're talking to. I'm the Fist of Khonshu, High Priest to the Moon God. I outrank you," Mark says. But Bader shakes his head, explaining that he is a simple doctor. "But I can assure you, Mr. Spectre, there is but one who outranks me in the cult of Khonshu," he says as he narrows his eyes. Nights pass, with Moon Knight doing his work to keep his territory and his people safe. That morning, he leans back in a plastic chair in front of the mission, groaning from his night's work. Reese walks up, handing him a coffee. "You know what I like about you, Reese?" he asks, taking a sip. "You don't try to fix me," he sighs. But he doesn't know that someone is watching them. Someone is listening. The shadowy figure peers through the blinds. "You have so much potential, but you're too intent on your crutch, your sacred duty. I'm going to break your faith, Moon Knight. I'm going to show you that the only thing worth believing in is nothing. And only then will we see what you really are," he says. Dr. Bader returns to his apartment, and he prays silently as he pulls off his coat, standing before his statue of Khonshu. He reaches for his mask, pulling it on. He knows that Moon Knight has strayed, that he requires correction, but he remains steadfast in his faith to Khonshu, willing to do his god's work as his hunter's moon. The man clutches at his ribs, looking up to see his neighbors coming towards him with knives. "Why are you doing this?" he gasps. They all sneer at him. "Because I want to, sport. For the hell of it," they all begin to echo at him. Mr. Knight sits in the mission with Reese as she drinks her blood, and he continues to eat his noodles, explaining to her about the murderous elderly that have been attacking people for the past 3 nights. None of whom remember anything about the attacks, he explains. "You think there'll be another attack tonight?" she asks. He nods, telling her that it'll be after midnight if the pattern holds. But the door pushes open and the wounded man stumbles in. "You're that freaky guy?" he asks as he clutches at his knife wounds. "I need help," he gasps. Mark nods and immediately stands up. "Reese, the first aid kit, please," he says. Reese nods and explains that the guy lives a few blocks away with his mother. "They call him Soldier," she says as she gets the kit and moves her laptop so the man can sit down. Mark pulls off his jacket and rolls up his sleeves. "Was it an elderly person? With a knife or hammer?" he asks. Soldier nods and explains that it was a whole group, with his mother among them. "Your mother was one of the attackers?" Reese asks as she cuts off his shirt. He nods, explaining that they are all from his buildings, all the attacks. "I don't know what's happening," he tells Mark. Mr. Knight nods as he works, but Reese begins to stare at the blood on her hands before she finally has to run out of the room. "She's squeamish?" Soldier asks, but Mark shakes his head. "No, dietary requirements," he explains. The two of them are walking towards Soldier's home, with Mr. Knight asking to speak with his mother. "Fine, I need to get my gun anyways," Soldier says as they walk up the stairs. He waves to the janitor, Holly, apologizing for walking on his floor. "No problem, sport," Holly says with a smile. Knight pauses before following Soldier into his apartment. I don't want to talk to your mother anyway. We need to go, he says. He steps back out into the hall, not surprised to find that they are now surrounded by knife-wielding members of the building. You're quick, Holly says with a smile. Knight nods at him, pulling out a moon shuriken. Thanks, but we both know you wanted me to know it was you, sport. How? He asks. Holly nods, explaining that it has something to do with his sweat, that it allows him to control people if they absorb it. You've been doping the building's water supply, Knight says. Holly begins to laugh, amazed that the hero figured it out so quickly. He said you were quick on the uptake, but I had to see for myself, he says. Knight narrows his eyes. Who's he? Who are you working for? He asks. But Holly refuses to tell him, explaining that he is going to sick all of the old people on him. He motions over Knight's shoulder, pointing at Soldier as the man steps out and puts his gun to Knight's head, also being controlled. Damn it, Soldier, Knight sighs. Knight reaches up and straightens his tie, offering Holly a challenge. Interesting. Go on, the janitor says with a nod. Knight holds up his throwing moon. You and me, brain to brain. I'll take your sweat, uncut, straight from the source, he says. Holly smiles and steps forward. Hell, I like your gumption, sport. I bet you think you've got an iron will or something, don't you? They say pride goeth before the fall, he says as he takes the moon and drips some sweat onto it, handing it back. Moon Knight takes the moon and licks the sweat off it. Here's the thing, Holly. You've never seen anything like what's in my head, he says simply. Holly smiles as he begins to drift into Mark's head, trying to take control. But his eyes widen as he is surrounded by darkness. It swirls him, grabbing hold and pulling him down. He looks up to see the moon appear. He reaches out for it. But something reaches back. A monstrous form of Moon Knight appears. Bandages begin spiraling out, wrapping around Holly, placing him into a sarcophagus, placing him right next to the others that inhabit his mind. In the real world, Holly drops to the ground, drool dripping from his mouth as the old people snap out of their trance. Soldier shakes his head. How? What did you do? He asks as Mr. Knight begins to walk away. Nothing that he'll recover from, he says simply. He returns to the mission to find Terry helping Reese clean up the blood. Thank you, Terry. You can go now, Knight tells him as he hangs up his coat. He sits with Reese, who apologizes for leaving, explaining that she almost forgot what she was until she smelled the blood. But Knight waves off the comment. I know what it's like to be fundamentally changed. My brain was rebuilt as a god's weapon. Your biology was rewritten with predators. Those are the hands that we've been dealt. But you and I decide what we do with what has been done to us. We make our own decisions, he tells her. She nods. Thanks, Mr. Knight, she says. Outside, Hunter's moon watches from the rooftops above. The next night, Mr. Knight looks at himself in the mirror, straightening his tie. Why didn't you kill me? Reese asks as she walks in. He looks at her. Good evening. Are you all right? He asks her. She glares at him, pulling out a throwing moon and holding it up. Someone tried to kill Ted last night when you were out running down a lead. Ted got away, but he pulled a half dozen of these out of his arm and back, she tells him, asking if he changed his mind about killing them. You know I didn't, he says as he steps forward. He takes the throwing moon, peering at it. They say things about you, about Moon Knight, about what you used to do to people, she says quietly. He nods at her as he looks at the weapon. I did all those things, and more, but I didn't do this, he says quietly. Shortly, he is leaping over the rooftops of the city, with Reese confirming over the comms that she and Ted, along with Terry and Soldier, are all locked inside the Midnight Mission. Good, he says as he lands. He looks up as a shadow falls across him. Hunter's moon drops from the night, punching him across the face and knocking him across the rooftop. Moon Knight picks himself up. "So, who the hell are you supposed to be?" he asks. "Hunter's moon, fist of Khonshu," Dr. Bader tells him. Moon Knight whirls, throwing his moons. "I already told you, Dr. Bader, I am the fist of Khonshu," he says. But Bader blocks the attack with his gauntlets. "Even a man has two fists, Mark Spector. How arrogant you must be to assume a god, our god, would have only one," he says. The two launch themselves, trading blows back and forth. "My interest is in correcting you. I am a doctor. I fix broken things." "Is that why you sent Holly to victimize a bunch of senior citizens? To teach me a lesson?" Mark asks. But Bader seems surprised, not sure what he's talking about. Moon Knight ducks a blow and cracks Bader on the jaw with his Eskrima sticks. "Don't play dumb with me," he shouts. But Bader blocks several more attacks and kicks Moon Knight in the face. "The vampire, that was my work. I wanted your attention. I wanted to take your measure," he says. Moon Knight stumbles and falls from the roof. "I'm doing what you're too weak to do," Bader shouts. Moon Knight reaches out and grabs a fire escape, stopping his fall. When the first vampires stalked humanity, they did so at night. They have always been the sworn enemy of the Fist of Khonshu, and you put them under your protection. Bader snaps as he leaps down, kicking Moon Knight free and dropping them both to the pavement below. Mark struggles to his feet, staggering forward and punching Hunter's moon across the face. "You're not gonna touch them!" he snaps. But Bader lashes out and kicks him away. He stares at Moon Knight, questioning why he moves the way he does. That there is nothing of beauty in the way he fights. That he fights like an animal. "Did you not receive the gift of the chorus upon your ordination? Were the memories of Khonshu's previous fists not invested in your mind?" he asks. Mark shakes his head and pulls out his grappling stick, shooting it at Hunter Moon's face. "Guess it was already too crowded in there," he says as Bader cries with pain. Moon Knight rushes forward and kicks Bader, but the hunter grabs his foot and twists him around, slamming him into the wall. "You're far more broken than I originally thought. But have no fear. I will make you fit for duty after I remove the distractions from your life," he says. He turns and stalks away as Mark tries to stand. At the mission, the others are standing around, but the door explodes inward to reveal Hunter's moon. Soldier opens fire, but Bader blocks the bullets and disarms him by throwing moons. Already his cult grows, but it requires thinning, he says, stalking forward with a stake in hand. "I will put him back on the right path," he says. But Moon Knight is suddenly behind him, a baseball bat in hand, and he brings it down hard, slamming it into the back of Bader's head. "No," he says, bringing it down again and again until Hunter's moon falls. Cute trick, Khonshu downloading dead men's memories into your head. Makes you fight real fancy. But you never earned it, he snarls. Each word is punctuated by the bat. "At the end of the day, you're just a doctor, dancing in borrowed shoes. And that's why I win," he says. Moon Knight grabs Hunter's moon by the cloak, dragging him out of the mission, warning him to stay away from those that Moon Knight has placed under his protection. "I'll do you like they did Osiris. They'll never find all your pieces." He throws him on the street. "So go, Fist of Khonshu, drag yourself from my temple, and avoid my attention in the future, lest I become more interesting," he says. The scarred man picks up his phone. His office is lit by the glow of his computers. "Problem, Clark? Or is it Rampage these days?" his boss asks. Clark tells him that he hates the living conditions, that he has to keep the windows open so that the computers don't overheat. It's one damn ethnic festival after another around here, he complains. But his boss waves it off, believing that Clark is doing good work. You want Moon Knight broken? I can put him on a leash. I can hit him where it hurts, Clark says as he looks at his screens, at all the accounts in Stephen Grant's name. Moon Knight with no money? He's just a normal guy. Nothing worse than just being a normal guy, he says with an evil smile. In the midnight mission, Mr. Knight sits with Reese at her desk. So you're just waiting around for your secret enemy to strike again? She asks. Knight nods. Holly's a vegetable, so he's not talking, and Dr. Bader's beef was unrelated. We're back to square one. I never said I was a great detective, he explains to her. But a voice calls to them from the door. Well, look at you. I didn't believe it when I heard it. An office and everything. Have you grown up? Tigra asks as she steps through the door. She rushes forward and grabs Knight in a hug as he explains to Reese that they were on the Avengers together. Why are you making this poor child call you Mr. Knight? She asks as she shakes Reese's hand. He straightens his mask, reminding her that it protects the ones he cares about. Tigra nods and points out to Reese that Mark once produced a show about his life and used his real name. He sighs as he steps away to answer his phone. I am surrounded by horrible women, he whispers. This is Mr. Knight, he says as he answers, ignoring their laughter nearby. I'm going to be very direct and very clear here, Mr. Knight. Do not make me repeat myself. You work for me now, Clark tells him over the phone. He explains that he has complete control of Knight's finances, that he can delete them with a push of a button. Now, I'm going to tell you what I want you to do, and you'll do it, he says. Shortly, the glass shatters as Moon Knight drops into the mobster's room, surrounded by suited thugs with guns. Never forget, you're a tool. A tool doesn't question its owner. A tool fulfills its purpose, Clark says to him over the comms. Destroy them. Call me when you're done, he says. Moon Knight moves quickly, throwing moons, disarming the thugs so he can move in fast, taking them out with punches and kicks, until only he stands alone. You guys in your masks, you ashamed of how you look? What's the matter? You ain't pretty like me? Jigsaw asks as he takes a sip of his drink, having not left the bar during the fight. I was told to beat you, Jigsaw. Then to tell you, Clark says hello, Moon Knight says, readying his weapons. Stuart Clark is still alive? You working for that punk now, Moon Knight? He asks with an evil smile. Moon Knight regards him for a moment. He seems to think so. I'll disabuse him of the notion soon enough. But hell, so long as I have you here, he says. Jigsaw nods and puts down his drink, pulling a knife. Waste not, want not, he shouts with glee as the two rush each other. Later, Clark swears as his call once again doesn't go through. Hello, Clark. Nice night, Moon Knight says from the window, startling him. Clark demands to know how he was found, with Moon Knight explaining that his young secretary is great with computers and phones, and his old friend is an excellent tracker. Tigra waves from the window. Clark nods as he backs up, tapping his phone and deleting more of Knight's money, warning him not to step forward. You don't know me at all, do you, Clark? Moon Knight asks as he steps forward. Clark becomes anxious, tapping his phone, deleting more money. I am a priest. I serve only my people, those who petition for my help. No wealthy priest has ever been good, he growls, grabbing Clark and holding him up. Later, Moon Knight and Tigra sit on a rooftop, looking out over the city. She turns to her old friend, asking him what's going on. I know you. You can't hustle me, she says. He looks at her for a moment before admitting that he's made some bad decisions, that everyone he's ever cared about is either dead or hates him. And then I helped Khonshu take over the world, he admits. He reaches up, taking off his mask, telling her the reason he wears it is so that he won't have to look at himself in the mirror. Her eyes widen as she sees Mark's cut and bruised face. She pulls him close, hugging him. "Damn, that's a lot," she whispers. He nods with a smile, pointing out that that's probably why the only person that hangs out with him is a teenage vampire who doesn't like him very much. "Don't worry, Mark. I'll hang out with you," Tigra whispers. Dr. Sturman looks at Mark during their sessions, reminding him that the therapy that the Avengers ordered him to take only works if he's being honest with her, and that she knows he's been lying. Later, he walks back into the mission, with Reese informing him that Terry is waiting in his office. What does he want? He asks her. But she doesn't know, just that he's scared. Well, with the mood I'm in, there's not going to be much on the streets tonight scarier than me, he tells her as he turns and walks away. He enters the office, taking a seat in his chair and facing his visitor. "Right, Terry. We know one another, so I'll spare you the ritual. How can I help?" Knight asks. Terry finally looks up, telling Knight that he knows the secret enemy that's been gunning for Moon Knight. "It's a soldier," Terry tells him, with Knight's eyes widening in shock. Earlier, Mr. Knight points out that he submitted himself to multiple brain scans, that he's been forthright with everything that she's asked him. But Dr. Sturman points out that he always avoids the questions, always answers in the way that he thinks Mr. Knight is supposed to answer. "Fine, ask me a question," he finally sighs. She looks at him for a moment. "Why are you so unhappy, Mark?" she finally asks. Now, the door to Soldier's hidden apartment explodes inwards, revealing Moon Knight in the opening. He and Terry step inside, finding recording equipment and pictures of Moon Knight and other members of the mission on the walls. "Wild. Think Soldier was CIA or something like that?" Terry asks. Moon Knight sighs as he pulls down a picture of Soldier when he served with Hydra. "Something like that," Moon Knight agrees. Earlier, Mr. Knight looks at Sturman, telling her that he has nothing to be unhappy about, that happiness doesn't apply to his life, that he merely has his duties as the Fist of Khonshu. There it is again. That's how you think Moon Knights shout and talk. Glibness and angst, she says. He looks at her for a moment. "Are you Jewish, Dr. Sturman?" he asks. Now, Moon Knight swoops from the rooftops, using the comms to order Reese out of the mission, in case Soldier attacks. "Fine, what are you going to do?" she asks. Moon Knight lands on a fire escape, sneaking over to the window. "You know what they say, a boy's best friend is his mother," he whispers. Reese pauses. "No one says that," she tells him. Moon Knight sighs. "Just get out of the mission," he tells her. Earlier, Mark explains to Dr. Sturman that he was raised Jewish, that his father was a rabbi, and Mark believed he was weak since he would never resort to violence. Despite everything his people had been through, Mark's father still believed in a just God. But Mark lost his faith long ago. And when he died, Khonshu offered him a new life, and he turned away from the God of his people and accepted. It was then that Mark realized that his father wasn't the weak one. Mark was. "I sold out everything I had been raised to believe in to save my own neck, to further indulge my addiction to violence," he says. Now, Moon Knight speaks to the soldier's mother, but she doesn't know where he is. He looks down at his phone as it begins to buzz, warning him of a perimeter breach at the mission. Earlier, Mark leans forward, explaining to Sturman that the reason he takes his faith in Khonshu, his duty, so seriously, is that he has nothing else left in his life. Mark slips inside the mission from the sewers, moving like a wraith through the shadows. He rounds the Khonshu statue, shocked to find Soldier chained up in the mission. "Moon Knight," a walkie-talkie squawks next to the beaten man. Twist, it wasn't Soldier after all, the voice says. The voice on the other side tells Moon Knight that a bomb has been set to explode, that he doesn't have enough time to disarm it. Moon Knight doesn't say anything as he moves forward, trying to yank the chains from the wall to free Soldier. So call this a case study. Is the Moon Knight for real? The voice says. Moon Knight continues to pull, unable to free his friend. You've got two options. One, you can admit that you're a phony and save yourself. Or two, you die here, wasting your life to save some ex-Hydra piece of trash, the voice says. Moon Knight helps Soldier to his feet, telling him to pull the chain tight. He's right. I ain't worth it. You gotta save yourself, Mr. Knight, Soldier gasps. Moon Knight glares at him sharply. I decide who deserves to live and die around here, so pull the damn chain, Moon Knight snaps at him. He pulls out a microplasma torch, beginning to cut through the chains, ignoring the voice as it begins to tick-tock away. Moments later, the mission explodes in a blast of fire. But the sewer gate shifts, and Moon Knight pulls Soldier onto the street. He coughs and gasps, collapsing on the floor. Moon Knight looks up as someone walks towards him. I'll be damned. You did it. I'm a big enough man to admit it, Moon Knight. I underestimated you, he says. The man leans down and Moon Knight looks up into the face of Terry. Damn, this is going to be fun, Terry says. He pulls a mask over his head, telling Moon Knight that Terry never existed. Call me Zodiac, he says. Mark tries to struggle to his feet. Gonna kill you for this, he gasps. But Zodiac lashes out and kicks him across the face. That's the spirit. That's the Moon Knight I've always heard about. Go on, really let me have it, he says. He grabs Moon Knight's cowl, continuing to antagonize him as he punches him. You gonna kill me, Terry? Go ahead, I'll just come back like I always do. And then I'm going to put you through the wood chipper, Mark gasps. But Zodiac pauses in his blows. Kill you? I don't want to kill you. I want to break you. I want to help you, he says, dropping Mark back to the pavement. Reese is running through the streets of the neighborhood, finally stopping at the clinic and banging on the door. And she knows what could happen. You don't like me, I don't like you. You don't like him, but he needs you now, she shouts. Zodiac lifts Mark again, kneeing him in the stomach and dropping him to the ground. I didn't expect this game to go on this long. I love it. So no, I'm not going to kill you, but I am going to leave you with motivation, he says as he draws a knife, stalking towards the unconscious Soldier on the ground. But Hunter's moon swoops out of the night, slamming Zodiac from behind. I think not, he hisses, knocking the villain into a nearby car. But Zodiac dusts himself off and stands up. Almost fell for that one. Now you, I couldn't predict. Who knew there was another Fist of Khonshu? He jokes. But he knows when he is overwhelmed and pulls a detonator from his pocket. He taps the button and a secondary explosion rips apart the building behind them. And when the smoke clears, Zodiac is gone. Mark is staring into nothing but darkness. But a light shines and Khonshu steps forward. Mark, my son, he says. Mark sits up with a scream, his wounds bandaged by Bader, who pushes him back down. Mark looks up at him, surprised that the doctor is helping him. You don't like me, Bader. If I recall right, you kicked me off a building, Mark whispers, struggling through the pain. Bader nods as he continues to sew the hero up. That may be true. I may not respect you. I may not even like you. But we have the same father, Mr. Spectre, and that makes us brothers, he says. But Mark's eyes begin to shut as he fades from the world once again. In the darkness, he still hears Bader speak, telling him the tale of his past. a young man growing up in Egypt. He took after his parents and became a doctor, yet he found his life empty, having never felt the presence of God as his parents did. In the real world, Bader continues to bandage Mark after painting the moon symbol upon his chest. He explains that he was attacked by vampires, taken from this world to feed them. The moon spoke to him, offered him a second chance at life, a divine purpose. Bader carries Mark through his home, placing him in a sarcophagus in a dark room. He looks down at his fellow Fist, admitting that Reese's actions to save him have challenged what he thought he knew about the creatures of the night. But he finally reaches out and touches Mark's mummified chest. Sleep, Mr. Spectre. It is with the ancient rites of Khonshu that I enter you. When the moon rises again, you will be ready to see it, he says softly. In the darkness, Khonshu comes to him. He places a hand on Moon Knight's shoulder. My son, I miss you. Pay me a visit soon, he says. The next night, the lid of the sarcophagus is raised, and Mark sits up, still hurt but able to move more than he should have. Thank you, Dr. Bader, he says to his fellow Fist. The man looks at him. As I said, I'm still not certain whether you are fit for your title, but all the same, we are brothers, he says. Mark pulls on his Mr. Knight suit and steps into the night, finding Tigra and Reese waiting for them. He thanks them for helping him and tells Reese about Terry. So, what's next? Tigra asks as the trio walks through the streets. Nothing's changed. I protect my people, and I made Zodiac a promise, he says. They continue to walk through the neighborhood with people calling out to Knight, waving to him and thanking him for the work that he's done. They arrive at the mission and find Soldier trying his best to clean up after the explosion. The man steps forward. I got something to say. I got a dirty history. You know that. I tried to leave it behind, but you saved my life twice and saved my mom. I'm your guy now, for life. Whatever you need, no questions asked. Mr. Knight looks at him for a moment before reaching out and shaking his hand. Thank you, Soldier. Reese looks around at the destruction of the mission, asking Knight what they are going to do. He steps through the entrance, looks around. We may not have a building, but we still have a mission. And if Zodiac wants to test me again, he knows where to find me, he says. He walks into the burned building, picking up one of the plastic chairs and sitting down, his white suit shining as a beacon in the gloom. I'm Moon Knight, and I'm not going anywhere, he says. The bar with no name. The villains quietly enjoy their drinks, but turn in shock as Mr. Knight walks in and takes a seat. He looks around at them, straightening his tie. Yes, I've always known about this place. It's just that until now, I've never wanted anything from any of you, he says. He leans back as the villains gather around him, angry looks on their faces. Now let's establish some parameters. I'm not Spider-Man, I'm not the Punisher. I'm Moon Knight. And you all know what that means. No one in this bar, myself included, knows precisely what I am capable of, he says. A look of fear crosses their faces as they step back. I'm going to say one word, and then I will leave. Zodiac, he says. Earlier, Mr. Knight stands before Dr. Sturman, explaining to her what happened with Zodiac, though she admits that she's never heard of the villain. Meanwhile, Tigra is on the phone with a mysterious caller, trying to learn what she can about the mysterious villain. She sighs into the phone. What does he want with Mark? Isn't that why I'm calling you? She asks her mysterious conspirator. At the present time, 8-Ball has left the bar, making his way down an alley as he makes a phone call. But he rounds the corner into Reese and Tigra, and the two women glare at him. I think he knows something, Tigra says. 8-Ball jumps as Mr. Knight puts his hand on the villain's shoulder. I guess there's a first time for everything, isn't there? He asks. Later, 8-Ball screams as he is dropped from the ceiling, dangling by a chain over the car shredder below. "Marsdale! Manslaughter Marsdale!" he finally shouts. Moon Knight yells for Soldier to kill the power and lowers the villain to the ground. 8-Ball quickly explains that he played poker with Marsdale, who talked about pulling a job with a guy named Zodiac. Moon Knight nods, finally letting 8-Ball run free, and Soldier looks at his new boss. "You wouldn't really have shredded him, would you?" he asks. Moon Knight just looks back at him. "If I was really going to drop him in the shredder, I would have put him in feet first," he says. Later, the window explodes outwards as Moon Knight tumbles through it, followed by Marsdale. "You don't get it, Moon Man. I don't feel pain. You can't beat anything out of me," he shouts. They trade blows back and forth, with Marsdale's fist slamming into Moon Knight. "I owe my life to Zodiac," he yells. Moon Knight whirls away and throws his moons. "Are you ready to die for him?" he asks. The blades stick into Marsdale's arms, and Moon Knight kicks him hard, sending him to the ground. "You can't feel pain. Cute. Are you immune to concussions too? Because I'll keep bouncing your brain off the inside of your skull until you forget your own name," Moon Knight growls at him. Marsdale struggles up, spitting blood onto the pavement. "I'm no punk like the clown or the rest. You can put me in the ground. Won't make any difference. I don't snitch." He spits. Moon Knight stands over him, looking at him grimly. "You know what? I believe you." His cloak flutters as he turns and walks away. "See you around, Marsdale," he calls. Later, Tigra finishes her report, finally admitting that she is uncomfortable with spying on Mark, that he's her friend. "I'm sorry, Greer. I know this is difficult for you, but Mark Spector is too dangerous to be left unwatched," Black Panther tells her from his command center in Avengers Mountain. Later, Dr. Sturman walks up the stairs to her apartment. She opens the door, shocked to discover Zodiac on her couch, waiting for her, the clown's severed head in his hand. "I'm worried about him, Doc. The boy's just on the wrong path, you know," he says with glee. "So, let's talk about how we're going to get this promising young man back on track." The doctor's office is dark. Bader sits back in his chair, clad in a dark suit. "Welcome to the Midnight Mission. My name is Dr. Moon. How can I help?" he asks. The PI asks him about Mr. Knight, but Mr. Moon explains that Mark has been taken into custody by the Thunderbolts, following Mayor Fisk's outline of superheroes. "My brother is indisposed, but the work goes on," he explains. The PI nods, spreading his paperwork on the table and telling Mr. Moon about Stained Glass Scarlet, a former vigilante turned terrorist. She was supposed to have been dead for 2 years, but someone is working with her MO again, spreading her sigil throughout the city. But the people she is killing are random. Some aren't even criminals. He tells her that she died in an old church in the South Bronx. Hunter's moon moves through the darkness of the city, watched by the presence of the full moon overhead. He drops down inside the old church, using his flashlight to find the sigils painted on the wall. Stained Glass Scarlet's sigils. A nearby candle suddenly lights, and a voice calls to him. "Is that you, my angel?" she asks. Hunter's moon whirls, preparing for a fight as more candles light the room around him. "Angel? Hardly. My god has no angels, only fists," he says. He demands to know where she is. "Everywhere, everywhere my mark is. So do not fear, for I am with you," she calls. Hunter's moon dodges an arrow from the darkness and surges forward. "I fear nothing. I am Hunter's moon. I am a fist of Khonshu," he snaps. But the floor gives way beneath his feet and he plummets below. He seems to fall through stained glass, with the shattered color sparkling around him. He tumbles onto the floor far below as the voice of Scarlet tells him how she was born. How Scarlet was killed in this church, only to be reborn by the faith of others, spreading the story of her life, the Bloody Lady of Vengeance. Because words taken together make a story, so I became a story, she says. Hunter's Moon lashes out at a cloaked figure, but it shatters as if glass. A story that could kill, Scarlet explains to him. He looks up, suddenly surrounded by more cloaked figures. Arrows launched outwards, stabbing into him. With every time I'm told, I grow more real. With every mind and heart I live in, I blossom further, she says. What vengeance is this? You, who call yourself righteous. What do you punish me for? He demands of her. He looks up as the cloaked figures become one, becoming massive as it floats over him, explaining that in her home, she needs no permission and can kill easily. Here, I can pass judgment as I see fit, she says. Hunter's Moon looks up at her, explaining that her judgment is wrong about him, that he once ruled by blind hatred that was combined with his duty, but has since changed his ways. I am a fist of Khonshu, but I am also a person. A person may change, learn. Can a story? He asks. The cloak falls away, exposing the massive visage of Scarlet, multi-armed, holding many weapons. She admits that a story cannot be learned, but it may change in time. Who knows what I will become? Hunter's Moon nods and drops to his knees, telling her that while she may be a young story, he serves one that has been told since the dawn of man. You are right. Stories are the most powerful thing in the world. For what is a god, if not a story? He says. The glass world is shattered by bright moonlight, and the image of Khonshu appears. Hello, Father, Hunter's Moon says. My son, Khonshu says in a greeting. The god steps forward, greeting the Scarlet Woman, telling her that she will not harm his son, his noble fist. I'll kill you, she snarls, brandishing her knife. But Khonshu reaches out and grabs her by the throat. We cannot die, little story, any more than a legend can. But we can war upon one another. We can be reduced in power. We can be banished. If only for a time, we can be hurt, he tells her. Hunter's Moon does not hesitate. He turns and runs from the church, managing to leap from a window and break free once into the world. Sounds scary, Reese says as Beta recounts the tale back at the mission. He nods. It was scary, punishing a young god by summoning an ancient one, he says. He leans forward, sighing as he finally apologizes to Reese for what he did to her friends, what he almost did to her. You tried to kill me, Bader. It's going to take some time, she tells him. Anyway, are you sure Stained Glass Scarlet is dead? She asks. But Bader shakes his head, reminding her that as long as one person believes in what Stained Glass Scarlet has become, her story will go on. And at that moment in the city, someone steps before her sigil and begins to chant her name. Elsewhere, the Ravencroft Institute. The guards stop their rounds, shocked to find one of the cells empty. They turn and run in fear, fleeing from the sign that reads, Rutherford, Winner. Moon Knight yells as he slams through the glass, plummeting towards the street below. He slams into a dumpster. Seconds pass as he struggles to his feet, looking back up at the window he flew through. I'm coming back. I'm coming back for you, and I'll have a way to kill you, he calls to the shadowy figure in the window. It had happened earlier. An old man had come to the Midnight Mission to ask for help. People had gone missing, and Moon Knight promised to inflict grievous injury on whatever had taken them. It didn't take much work. Everyone had gone missing in the same place. Now dressed as Moon Knight, he entered the strange building. But as he continued to try door after door, he discovered that the place was a maze, a labyrinth. He continued to search, discovering the remains of bodies beneath the floor. This place was a trap. It was designed to weaken the prey over time. He continued to move through the endless halls when he suddenly paused, looking up at the strange hallways, and it dawned on him. It wasn't just a trap. The building itself was alive. Did it want to eat me? Was it some sort of aggressive mimic predator? Moon Knight thought to himself. He knew it wanted something, but he wasn't sure what. As he continued forward, he would catch glimpses of the others who had become trapped inside. Moon Knight would turn, rushing after them, but he couldn't catch up to them. The halls would continue to shift. I think the 6th floor touched their minds, made them a part of it, because that's how I got out. He tells Dr. Sturman from her couch. When I was weak enough, exhausted enough, stretched to the limit of my mental and physical endurance, that's when it tried to touch my mind, he explains. He had crouched as the monster reached into his mind, but he surged to his feet. That's when I made it scream. It vomited me out like I was poisoned food, which I suppose I was. I was there for 4 days, he tells her. He apologizes for missing their sessions, hoping that he didn't cause any problems with the Avengers. But she shakes her head. I didn't report you missing our sessions. I assumed you had business, she tells him after a pause. Mr. Knight sits up, surprised by this. He explains that the Black Panther had reached out to the mission while he was gone. She can't stop going on about talking to a real superhero, he sighs. They talk for a few more minutes, with Dr. Sturman asking Mark if he really thinks that he can save the people of this neighborhood. Your midnight mission is gone. Your superhero antics may have saved some people, but haven't they also brought more violence into the neighborhood you claim to be helping? She asks. Mark ponders this before leaving. He arrives at the Sanctum Sanctorum, with Wong answering the door after he knocks. Hello, Wong. I need a favor, Mr. Knight says, reminding Wong that he had helped him out in Vegas in the past. If I remember correctly, you assaulted Stephen Strange and stole his powers after that, Wong points out. Mark sighs. Fine, swallow you one, he says. Wong finally ushers him in, asking what he can do to help. Call it a matter of esoteric real estate, Mark says as he enters. Later, Moon Knight and Reese stand outside the monster building, with the vampire receptionist asking what she is supposed to do if Mark doesn't come back. Then, I guess you'll have to find a new job, he tells her. He begins to walk up the steps, telling her not to worry. I always come back, he says. Moon Knight steps inside, greeting the building once again. He knows it doesn't like him, and knows that it doesn't want to release those inside. I know what you are, he says as he steps forward. The House of Shadows, he whispers. He knows that the creature has fought against Doctor Strange, that it has been banished in the past, though it always returns. I don't have any magical powers. I can't banish you like Strange or his pals, he says, but he stops and drops a duffel bag on the floor. So, I brought enough thermobaric explosives to level this building, he says simply. But he holds out his hand. He knows that the house wants to be lived in, despite how weird it is. That is the purpose of houses. I have an offer for you. Let these people go and come with me. You and I, we both need a purpose. And I can offer you the same thing that keeps me going, a mission, he says. A short time later, Mr. Knight, Reese, and Soldier stand outside the shattered remains of the Midnight Mission. But a strange fog rolls through the street, and the mission is suddenly intact once again. There we go. Welcome to the team, House of Shadows. We're back in business, Mr. Knight says to his associates as they walk inside the living building. But across the street, Rutherford Winner watches them all. Dr. Sturman looks at Moon Knight, who sits on her couch. "This is a change," she says, looking at the costume. He looks at her. "That's the thing about the moon, Dr. Sturman. It changes," he says. He tells her that he met Rutherford Winter recently, another of Sturman's patients. "He came to my home with a gun," Moon Knight says. Sturman looks up from her notes, telling Mark that Winter is a dangerous man who is broken on the inside. "Interesting. You think Winter can't be saved?" Mark asks her, and she shakes her head. "He can't be saved, only contained," she says. At the midnight mission, Winter looks up at Moon Knight over his head. "Coming into my home with a gun like this? I think you made a mistake," he says. He leaps down at Winter, kicking him in the chest and knocking the gun away. But the man twists and kicks out, knocking Moon Knight aside. You're good," Moon Knight says as he gets to his feet. Winter rushes him with a knife, and the two lock in combat. "I want my doctor back, Moon Knight. What have you done with her?" Winter demands. Moon Knight knocks him away. "You're jealous that Dr. Sturman has another patient?" he asks. He shouts to the mission, asking it to shift, and the building begins to move around them, throwing Winter off balance. But he manages to land on his feet. "Jealous? You don't know what's happening, Moon Knight. I am unwell. I wish to be better. For that, I require my doctor. What have you done with her?" he snaps. The two continue to fight as the mission shifts around them. In the present, Mark asks Sturman if she thinks that he needs to be contained. But she shakes her head, telling him that he has already contained himself in the life that he pursues. She finally asks him maybe Zodiac was right, that he should no longer be Moon Knight, to give up his superhero lifestyle. "You didn't ask what I did to Winter," Moon Knight says after a moment, as she sits back. "I assumed you captured him, if you didn't kill him," she says. But Moon Knight shakes his head, pointing out that she began to discredit him and shift the conversation. "But you didn't mention the most important thing that we have in common. We both want to get better," Moon Knight says. "Mark, there is no getting better for Rutherford Winter. He's a broken weapon. He has no future. You do. That's what we need to be talking about," she tells him. Mark thinks back to their fight. He knocks the knife from Winter's hand, but the killer grabbed him and pulled him close. "You fool! That thing is not Andrea Sturman," he snapped. Mark looks at Dr. Sturman in her office. "If she's dead, I'm going to hurt you beyond comprehension," he says finally. She looks shocked, not understanding, but Moon Knight glares at her. "I want you to know that before we begin, it's going to go very badly for Zodiac. Nothing can stop that. But if she's dead, then you live, and you will know nothing but pain for the rest of your existence," he says. He tells her that Winter thought Moon Knight was responsible, but realized that he knew nothing about it. Sturman begins to sweat. "Mark, you need to calm down. You're having an episode," she tells him. But Moon Knight stands. "No, I'm not. Am I, Waxman?" he says. Sturman suddenly smiles, dropping the charade. "Ah, hell, you got me," she says with a smile. Her body begins to shift and melt, growing in size until Waxman fills the room. "Zodiac won't be happy about his plans going off the rails, but screw him. I'm just going to kill you," he snarls. He rushes Moon Knight, but the hero leaps out of the way and throws 2 liquid nitrogen grenades. "I told you, I was going to hurt you beyond comprehension," Moon Knight says as the monster freezes in place. Later, Waxman awakens to Moon Knight's voice. He is trapped in a small steel sphere, with the hero talking to him over the radio. "You're trapped. You're not getting out of there unless I let you," Moon Knight tells him. He warns Waxman that he will be trapped there forever unless he tells Moon Knight what he wants to know. That he'll pour concrete on the sphere and Waxman will forever be a part of the building's foundation. Alone, forever, in the dark, Moon Knight growls. Waxman realizes what his fate might be and quickly cracks. "She's alive! Zodiac has her!" he shouts into the radio. Moon Knight hands the radio to Soldier, telling him to write down the location. He then walks over and hits the button on the concrete mixer, beginning to pour it into the hole. Waxman begins to shout, pointing out that he was cooperating. "Yeah, you did. Hurts being lied to, doesn't it? See you in hell, Waxman," Mark growls after taking back the radio. He tosses it in the hole and begins to walk away. He turns back to Tigra, Soldier, and Winner. "I know that's why Reese isn't here, but Waxman was a serial killer. He deserved worse, and I may do worse tonight. If any of you want out, now's the time," he says. But none of them leave. He nods and turns away. "Good. We need to move quickly, because there's going to be blood tonight," he says. The group arrives at the warehouse that Waxman told them about. Moon Knight, Winner, and Tigra descend on the building, working through the shadows and taking out the guards. Inside, they find Dr. Sturman under the watch of Jigsaw. The gangster smiles, holding a knife to the woman's throat, pointing out that Moon Knight really made him look bad when he showed up and took down his guys. But Jigsaw looks up at the Moon Knight in the shadows, stopping as he realizes the hero's eyes are glowing green. White-gloved hands reach from the shadows behind him, and Moon Knight grabs him from behind, whirling and throwing the gangster into a pile of wooden crates. "No, no, no, no!" Jigsaw snaps. But Moon Knight is already on him, his fists falling again and again until blood is covering his white costume. Tigra tries to call to him, but Mark doesn't listen. It is Dr. Sturman who reaches out and takes his arm. "That's enough, Mark. That's enough," she whispers as she pulls him away. He breathes heavily, finally coming to his senses. "Are you all right?" he asks, taking her hand. "I've seen much worse than Zodiac and his little friends," she tells him. They all look up as Zodiac's voice fills the warehouse. "And that's the thanks I get for not torturing you? The ingratitude, Doc, really," he says. Moon Knight takes his cape from Tigra and puts it on, telling Zodiac to come out so they can finish this fight. "No can do, buddy, because while you're cooling your heels all the way over in Jersey, I'm looking at the Midnight Mission. Love what you done with the place, by the way," he says. Zodiac looks up, taking in the building. He doesn't know how Moon Knight rebuilt it so quickly, but he doesn't like the way the place smells and refuses to go inside. Which is difficult, because how am I going to kill Reese from way out here? He asks. Sturman questions why Zodiac is doing this. Zodiac explains to her that he, like her, is trying to make Moon Knight better. That the superhero that chains himself to friends, mission, and duty isn't Moon Knight. And that breaks my heart. He's got so much potential, but he's afraid, he says. Moon Knight gets angry. If you go into the mission, it will kill you. And if you stay out there, Hunter's Moon will kill you. You lose, Zodiac, Moon Knight snaps. Zodiac begins to laugh, shaking his fist comically at the sky, proclaiming that Moon Knight beat him. Come on, I'm a damn supervillain. You think I'm not 5 steps ahead of you? You think I just turned up? He asks. He looks at the gathering of mercs around him and at Hunter's Moon at his feet. We got here as soon as you left. Hunter's Moon killed 3 of my guys before we knocked him out, but hey, that's why I roll with a full Zodiac cartel, he says. He laughs again and explains that he isn't going into the mission to drag Reese out. Either she comes out, or his men will start dragging people from their homes and killing them in the street. Anyway, great to catch up, Moon Knight, he says as he hangs up and puts his phone in his pocket. Love that guy. Sometimes the universe just gives you gifts, you know? He says to his men. Mark quickly calls Reese, ordering her not to leave the mission and telling the soldier to make sure she stays. Tigra tries to comfort him, telling him that they will figure out a way to get back to the mission in time. But Mark shakes his head and steps away. I know what I have to do. I know how to get there in time to save her, he says quietly. The world seems to darken around him as Mark bows his head. Khonshu, he says, but there's no response. Khonshu, I know you can hear me, he shouts. He falls to his knees, his cape spread out around him. Father, he whispers gently. And that is when Khonshu appears over him. My son, he calls. Mark asks Khonshu for help, telling him that he needs to save his friends and Hunter's Moon, the god's loyal servant. Khonshu reminds Mark that he is imprisoned because of Mark's doing. There will be a price, Khonshu rumbles. There always is, and you'll have it, Mark tells him. At the mission, Reese tries to go outside, but the soldier grabs her arm and she whirls on him, baring her fangs. You going to stop me, soldier? You really think you can? She snaps. He stares at her for a moment before his eyes soften. Okay, but Mr. Knight is on his way, and I got an idea to buy some time, he tells her. Moon Knight finally looks up, telling his friends that the path to the mission is set, but it will be very dangerous. Winter, you stay with Dr. Sturman, he says. Tigra steps up next to him. This is going to be weird, isn't it? She asks. He nods. Of course it's going to be weird. Are you with me? He asks, holding out his hand. She takes his hand and nods. Always. There's something you should know though, before we do whatever this is. I've been spying on you for the Avengers, she says softly. But Moon Knight has always known. He knew that Black Panther couldn't let him go without keeping an eye on him. But it didn't matter to Mark. Because I needed a friend, he says. He turns and the path opened before him. This is the path, but we're not welcome. The way will be dangerous, so whatever you do, don't stop running, he warns her. At the mission, Zodiac begins to order his mercs to start killing people. But the door opens and Reese steps out. Here I am, Terry. But I'm not alone, she says. Someone steps out of the mission behind her, and Zodiac's eyes widen in shock. Zodiac? Nice night, Mr. Knight says, readying his eskrima sticks. Zodiac is shocked as he looks at Mr. Knight. Here I am. So are you going to hide behind all your guys like a coward? Or are you and I going to settle this like men, one-on-one? Knight asks. Zodiac stares at the white suit, confused. No, he's in Jersey. Whatever this is, I'm not buying it, Zodiac snaps. He draws his pistol and fires 3 times. Moon Knight and Tigra continue to run through the eternal realm of Khonshu, with the remains of past fists pursuing them for disturbing their eternal rest. Geez, Mark, is this where you're going to end up? Tigra asks as she looks back at the zombies. I don't know. No one ever told me about any of this, he tells her. In front of the mission, Zodiac laughs. Damn, that was something, he says, pointing out that it was very heroic for Reese to throw herself in front of the bullets, trying to save the fake Mr. Knight. Too bad this is a .357 Magnum. Bullet just keeps going through you and into, it's Soldier, isn't it? Zodiac asks as Reese leans down to help her fallen friend. Zodiac shakes his head. His dumbass always was looking for something to die for. Glad I could help, he says. But throwing moons fly through the air, embedding in Zodiac's back. It's you, he says as he turns, right into the raging fist of Khonshu. Ah! Moon Knight bellows as he punches Zodiac. Zodiac stumbles back, angry. It's not the pain, Moon Knight, because I don't feel pain. It's how much time and money I put into this plan, and you're never where you're supposed to be, he snaps. Moon Knight stands with Tigra. You're a dead man, Zodiac, he growls. Zodiac begins to laugh again, pointing out that he has a small army of guys with guns. You have a dead Hydra guy, a fourth-rate ex-Avenger, a knocked-out knockoff, a gunshot teenage vampire, and your fists? Zodiac points out. No, not my fists, Moon Knight says. The pathway opens, and the zombie Moon Knights descend on Zodiac and his men, tearing into them. Moon Knight leaps at the villain. He drops one of the mercs, grabbing a chainsaw from her grasp. Zodiac! He bellows. The villain turns and begins to run away. How? How the hell was I supposed to plan for this? Damn zombie Moon Knights? Am I mad? But at least the car bombs I've been parking up and down this street all day won't go to waste, Zodiac shouts to himself. But as he reaches for the detonator, Reese is suddenly there, leaping on him. She grabs him and throws him against a dumpster. Zodiac rolls over, looking up into the eyes of the rage-filled vampire. Little Reese, look at you. Found your spine and the monster came out. And I love it, Zodiac says. The mercs have finally fallen, but the zombie Moon Knights now turn their attention to Tigra. She prepares to fight, but Hunter's Moon finally staggers to his feet. He drops to his knees before the warriors of the past. Sisters, brothers, I honor the sacrifices you have made for our father. I honor the blood that you have spilled in his name tonight. Return to your halls, richly appointed. Return to your rest, sorely earned. I will join you there in time, when my own duty to our father takes my life for the final time. I thank and honor you, loyal fists of Khonshu, Hunter's Moon says. The zombies look at him for a moment before bowing before him. In the alley, Moon Knight puts a hand on Reese's shoulder, staying her anger. No, you can't kill him. That's not you. It would do something to you. It would make you just as bad as me, Mark tells her. He pushes her away, stepping around her and grabbing Zodiac by the throat, lifting him into the air. He begins to squeeze the life from him, but something begins to take control. No, not now! I need to finish this! Mark shouts. He drops Zodiac to the ground, grabbing at his head. Don't you dare! Let me finish him! But Mark suddenly stops shouting. No, Mark. If you murder him like this in front of her, you'll lose her forever, Moon Knight says. Moon Knight pulls off the mask and turns back to Reese, who is confused. Hello, Reese. I'll confess, I don't like the rough stuff as much as the other fellows do. And you've had a bad enough night without seeing another murder done, he says as he bows to her. Introductions are in order. My name is Stephen Grant, he says. And that is the conclusion to the Zodiac arc in Jed MacKay's Moon Knight story. This is an ongoing story, and I have personally been enjoying the crap out of it. So if you enjoyed this story, I would highly recommend going out and buying the series for yourself, catching up with what you have missed between this story I just told you and the current stuff going on. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and click that bell icon to get notifications when new videos go live. I'm Dan, this has been Moon Knight by Jed MacKay, and I am looking forward to reading another story to you guys in the future, which I'm pretty sure is going to be X-Men, so I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Stay safe, and have a good rest of your day.